you've all realised by now, and it's the first of the meetings for this year because we've had our first meeting taken away by the COVID issue. We've got a lot to get through today, two major items and a bit of business in the front end as well. So if I can kick off straight away with the agenda items, and I'm going to be depending on officers quite a bit to help me out with this as well. The first thing is the any apologies for this meeting. Can I refer that to you, Joe, please? Bronwyn, sorry, Bronwyn.
Hello, we've had apologies from Councillor Graham Morris.
That's all. Okay. We appear to have non-attendance by Councillor Tinknell and Councillor Clark. Maybe they'll join us later. Are there any declarations of interest, please, for the items on this agenda? I hear none. Thank you for that. The next item is that we go into the business plan for this year. This is just basically setting up the way we're going to work for this year. We'll start off with the, if we may, with getting the chairing and the vice chairing sorted out. Can I hand that over to you, Bronwyn, please?
Certainly. Yes, the community's annual business report has been published with the papers. In terms of chairing, chairs were actually agreed at full council earlier in this year. So it's only the vice chair who needs to be nominated and agreed.
Well, I'm very happy to nominate Joe Sargent as vice chair. And I hope that's acceptable to all.
Seconded.
That looks like...
I'm seeing no dissensions from that. So thank you, Joe. I welcome you on board. I'll take on the other items then, if I may, on this, Bronwyn. The terms of reference for this are with the papers, but they're also on the community scrutiny page of the website, so you can see how all that works. The members for this meeting are actually the same as we ended up last year, with one exception, and that is Councillor Rippington has stood down, and this is not of his making, but it's because the complexion of the council has changed marginally, and that means that the committees are now 10 people, 10 members instead of 11. The astute amongst you will have noticed that that means we have an even number, and were it to come to a vote, and I honestly can't remember the last time it did, then the chair would have a casting vote. But I doubt very much if we're going to get to that stage during this year. If that's okay, if I can, anybody got any comments on what we're doing for the rest of this year in terms of our business plan? I think we've gone through the motions on that one, so everybody knows what's going on. Okay. Right, I'm going to quickly whiz into a couple of chairs items, if I may, very quickly, just so that the public fully understands. Normally we would have 4 scrutiny meetings in each year. This year, because of COVID, we're only going to have 3, but there's also a working group which at the moment is studying or looking at how the voluntary, how people stepped up to voluntary service in terms of the COVID pandemic. We're trying to learn from that and understand how that can better inform strengthening our community relationships, not just for the next pandemic, God help us, but for for future reference generally. So that's an ongoing piece of work, which is. Did I see a hand over there from any? No. Okay, so that's going on, so you can understand where we are on that one. Just a little bit of housekeeping, really. I very much hope that we're all going to use first names, and that means officers as well. I'm very embarrassed by talking to first names to members, but to officers, but not but them not to us. And I think it's far better if we try and keep that protocol. We've done that in previous years. I hope we can keep that going. Can I ask your questions and points always to be brief? The more points we have, the more quickly put is the important thing, rather than very long interventions. And if we may, let's try and keep party and ward out of this as much as we can. We're representing the whole of the city here as members, and I hope we can all follow that convention as well. Thank you. Thanks for that. One final thing just for me, I can't really see now the blue hands that go up on the system. I will be grateful if you can put your hand up, or preferably even wave a bit, and it makes it easier for me to see what's going on. So I'd be very grateful if you would help me out with that. Good. Okay, so that's got through all of my stuff, except to talk about the performance item on the agenda today. This is an item which we've talked about a lot in the past, last year, because communities doesn't have its own section really for this. The officers of this year tried to make the best of that, and yet it's still been, items have been taken out because they can't really be assessed because of where we are with the pandemic. Some items are fairly meaningless because of the pandemic. Things have completely changed in terms of the way we've had to be doing things and the priorities. And I think in view of the fact that some of the items are also annual performance items, which means that we can't look at all of them anyway, I'm going to suggest that we do not waste the officer's time by bringing him to the meeting for this item, but we need to tell him that. So does anyone have any objection to that? We can still discuss the item and refer questions to the officer, but I don't think we need to bring the officer in for this meeting. We'll push it on to another meeting. Is everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Okay, I see no objections. In that case, Joe or Bronwyn, could you let Nick Smith know that we can stand him down for that item? And in that respect, I'm going to move public forum to the beginning of the meeting. It is on the agenda, obviously, at the beginning of the meeting, but because the questions were relating to that item, I think we can do them early rather than wait for the item to come up. So again, there's a bit of business that we've got to get through, and I hope that's satisfactory. There's one final thing before we get on to public forum, and that is the, sorry, there isn't, there's two things. First one is the minutes of the last meeting, which of course was last year, and last March, in fact, or this year, but last session. Has anyone any observations about the last meeting? Yes, I see a hand. That's Carla. Yes, Carla.
I've just got one question about an action that I want to check has. Yes, the check that has happened. So it's in the public forum section of the minutes from the last meeting. In our papers, it's on page 13, and it's in relation to a question about FOIs.
Yep.
And it says that officers would provide a response. And I just wondered if that had happened.
Carla, is that the question from Suzanne Audrey?
Yes, I think
yes.
so.
I'd pick that up as well. I've mentioned that to Bronwyn. Bronwyn, can you give me an update on that, please?
Hello, yes, apologies. I think that was my oversight in not circulating an answer, but I am aware that the answer to the question is that social import reports are reported to PGL, and I believe there's an annual update going to be available as well. I'll make sure that that is circulated to the Commission and to Suzanne as well.
Thank you for that. Any other points? I've got one point on the minutes. Anybody else? Okay, apart from that one, there was a report at the last meeting, which I've spoken to Bronwyn about the impact fund. That report talks about how it needs further, we need to look at this further. I note that this is not on our action tracker. And I think we should be we should consider this for the work program later on in the meeting. It's a big chunk of money. It's a newish sort of arrangement. It's never really come forward for a conversation, and I think it needs to be brought back into the fold of it. So when we get to that point, Bronwyn, I think we'll need to consider that as part of the work program items as well. I have no other items on that, so we can move forward, I hope. The next one before we get to public forum is the action tracker. Bronwyn, again, perhaps you'd like just to quickly take us through this?
Yes, the action tracker has come in as it's looking slightly different than it would from regular meetings, partly because this is a new year, and partly at particular request in order to have a look at some of the items that were raised as potential items that would be included on the work programme. But some conversations have taken place which either have slightly changed the complexion of that slightly. The three items that were raised as actions to bring forward were libraries. We've talked to officers, and in light of both the impact of the pandemic, but also just business as usual and the way things have changed, it doesn't look like this year is a useful time for something to be brought to scrutiny. The waste item that was originally suggested as something like an inquiry day or quite a substantial item. The leads of the commission have met and conducted a scoping exercise, which I think was quite valuable for those who attended and did map out a number of those issues. But again, because of some ongoing conversations with officers, it did not seem like an inquiry day was the time to bring this forward in this year. However, we have added it to the work programme as an item to come to the Commission in February. And the last item was the studentification. This is one which has been majorly impacted by the pandemic. So again, it's a difficult one to look at this point from officers' perspective because of impacts on more or less every aspect of what the Commission wanted to look at.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments from members? Right. Yes, Martin.
Yes, thanks, Anthony. Yeah, and thanks, Bronwyn. No, I agree. There's no point rushing these items onto our agenda if we can't have a proper discussion. I'm conscious in terms of the libraries that a series of grants for initiatives were being issued. I mean, I just wonder if there's some way of getting us some sort of update on the progress of that. I believe they might have been just extended, but just to reassure us that what can be done is still being done, and where it's getting to would be helpful.
I can certainly take that away if that's all agreed.
I would certainly support that. I think that's a very good point. So can we put that as an item for officers, and we'll ask for a report. That could be a written report. Martin,
yes, something like that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Any other points? I see none. No, that's fine. Well, thank you for that. So we will, and I should say, I will sign off the minutes from the previous meeting. Sorry, I should have said that. And we'll move on. So we're now on to public forum. Clive, I'm not sure quite when you joined us. And Bronwyn, I don't see Suzanne Audrey here.
Suzanne is present. So if it's all right, hello, Suzanne.
Oh, hello there.
I know you need to get away quite quickly. So
let's kick off straight away, Suzanne, with your questions. You've had answers to both of them. Do you have any further, any supplementaries?
Yes, so thanks very much for the answers. That's great. So just this probably a bit unfair because I've got my counsellor here. So in relation to Jubilee Pool, you'll be aware that there's sort of a lot of public upset about that one, but apparently now that the public is going to be involved in the next meeting. So I just wondered when that's going to be.
I don't think there's an officer here that can answer that question, Suzanne. But
yeah, John's waving madly.
John, okay. Unusually, John, I'll let you come in on this.
If I may, yeah, you're asking about the meetings of Jubilee Pool. Is that right, Suzanne?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a meeting and a further meeting tomorrow of the cross-party group of councillors. That's all the councillors in the Bristol South area that whose residents would be likely to use the pool or have schools that use it. And then I guess tomorrow we're going to map out exactly how many meetings we'll have in the coming few weeks. And we have earmarked, well, I'd say at least one of the meetings for local pool users or residents to be able to contribute to. We can't invite them to every meeting, unfortunately, because there's confidential information being discussed, which I know you have some issues with. But I think, you know, I'll certainly work with the chair, which is the chair and the vice chair, which are Gary Hopkins and Councillor Morris. And we'll make sure that there is a meeting that involves the public and local residents.
Suzanne, very unusually, you've got an answer from a member of the Scrutiny Commission instead of an officer or the cabinet member. Are you happy with that answer?
Yes, and I know that John's doing his best, and we're grateful to you, John. It's just keeping up with what's going on there. And then in relation to my second question about all this Section 106 and still outstanding projects, and I do realise we've got COVID-19, but some of these have been well overdue, years overdue. And I understand there's going to be a list, or in fact, all of you councillors may have it at the moment. How can the public, it says it's going to be on the council website. Where would that be? And will it be easy for us to see?
Right, I'll try and take this on as an ordinary councillor as well. There used to be, of course, the favoured list of requests, which were then moved up the list accordingly as they became the favoured projects under the old Neighbourhood Partnership Scheme. That fell away. It was going, you're quite right, it was going to be replaced by a list. I have not seen that list in writing, and I'll open up to anybody else who has, but certainly that list is sort of verbally discussed at the area committee meetings, but is not, as far as I'm aware, has not been set down yet. And if anybody could answer that, I think Martin's hand on that. Martin, have you got something to add?
Thank you. It won't be to answer it. Is it okay if I still say something relating to that?
Not really, Martin. We're trying to deal with Suzanne's question here.
But there are other people wanting this information. It's really hard to get, and that is an issue. So I'm just supporting that request. Okay,
Bronwyn, that's another one I think we take back to officers and ask for an answer, and we make sure that answer gets to Suzanne Audrey as well. I'm sorry, Suzanne, we're all frustrated about this, and you are but a member of the public who's frustrated, and so are we. So we'll all, I think, cooperate to try and get a definitive answer for this issue. Remember now, though, that this list more comes from officers than it used to. It used to come out of the committee meetings and then was assessed and graded by officers. It's now sort of the other way around, and that whether or not that makes a difference, I don't know. But we'll try. We'll ask for that list to be prepared for each of the area committees. Does that answer your second point?
Well, as best you can. So thank you very much, everyone.
I'm struggling. Okay, thank you for that. And I know that you've got to get away. So, but I'm glad we got your questions in beforehand, before you left.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Clive, hello. I don't know if you heard that we're not going to have the officer here for the performance item, and we're only going to nod through the risk item as well, because they don't really relate specifically to the Community Scrutiny Commission. Having said that, please ask your questions now, and we will communicate any supplementaries to the officer, and we'll get answers back to you. So off you go.
Thank you very much. So my questions are really the both sides of the coin. One is homelessness and the other is lack of affordable housing. So the officer was very helpful in showing that you can draw a bit more of a conclusion from a package of measures on homelessness. I think they need to be dived in a bit more detail. And also I think you need longer term measures, and whether that's for community scrutiny, I'll let you guys judge, but certainly a package to get a better feel for what's happening on homelessness. So that's sort of a question to the measurement officer as to whether he can put together or she can put together a package of measures, which includes some of the ones that was in my answer. So if you can relay that on, please. Then moving on.
Hang on a second, Clive. Julian is actually here and might be prepared to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, hi, Clive. I mean, I'm happy to answer that question. We do monitor, obviously, a large range of indicators internally about homelessness. And obviously homelessness is on the agenda for today in terms of what we're doing with the longer term move on and change for good programs, which again are longer term measures aimed at making sure that we tackle some of the big blockers to addressing homelessness in recent years. So I'm happy to consider any new indicators that people would think would be beneficial to that. Obviously, we want to bring in some indicators for the move on program. So we'll be developing new ones for that, and are developing new ones. But if there are any you think you would like to see, we probably do have the details on that. We just have, these are just the top level indicators that I think in the past have been chosen to represent the high level indicators for homelessness.
Okay, so I don't want an instant answer now, but I just feel it needs a bit of thinking about over the next few months or even 6 months to put together a package of measures that can signpost what's going on. So I'll leave that one. The second thing is the affordable housing, which is actually in the risk report. I don't think 800 as a target is enough anymore. I think we need to be building more than that, which is a bit tough really when it's quite a task getting up to 800. And I'm really concerned about lack of space on the failure of a joint spatial plan and the potential loss of cooperation across local authorities. That looks like it's putting together a perfect storm. And asking around after my question to growth and regen scrutiny, a number of people feel that the WECA duty to cooperate will be strained severely with the new housing targets for North Somerset and South Gloucester. And they will focus on housing and won't focus on affordable housing needed for Bristolians, quite understandably. So my question, and it might even be for Anthony, but it's for people to consider, this almost becomes a problem for the Metro Mayor, but he's possibly the last person I would trust to deal with that problem. So I'd be grateful for some advice as to how we start to pull this together, because I can see the whole programme unravelling.
You might want to rephrase that last bit, Clive. We don't usually use those sorts of terms in these public places, but there is the perfect storm. I think is accompanied by the planning white paper. That really does make it a perfect storm, which is terrifying. But there is. It's possible that Julian may be able to answer this. I think your question is more of a political, broad-based nature, I'm not sure that Julian will be able to answer it, but I would also say that the figures across all three unitary authorities the government have farmed out are obviously a major increase in the numbers that we have to confront. But although the figures grow massively for Baines and South Gloucestershire, the one that's going to be most difficult to achieve will be Bristol's if we lose the ability to cooperate. Because that's been the mainstay of providing those. It's the deal whereby people who work in Bristol pay their council tax somewhere else for another authority, and that deal is going to break down if we're no longer cooperating, and that does concern me a lot. Julian, do you want to add a final note on that? Although
I can add some aspects to the process if that helps.
Well, I think it will. Let's keep it to that then.
I mean, obviously, the breaking down of the previous spatial plan obviously is disappointing for Bristol, because we were, set to gain affordable housing in the region via that duty to cooperate, and so obviously that's delayed that significantly. Work has begun on obviously new spatial development strategy, and one of the aspects on that is going to be affordable housing and housing delivery, and again, ideally be able to resurrect some deal around affordable housing and the distribution of that across the sub-region. Clearly, that's in a situation where calculations on quantum have changed recently as a result of national planning changes, but I don't think it changes the overall picture, as Anthony has pointed out, which is that Bristol is the one who's still going to end up with the most significant and serious housing need in the region, and therefore will need that duty to cooperate to help address that issue.
Thank you very much for that, Clive. I think that between us, I think that answers your supplementary question. Are you happy with that?
Well, I think that's the only answer I was going to get here. I think it's something I need to take up with WECA, because they've got the ability, if they wish to help. So thank you very much for letting me have my question. Okay,
not at all. Thanks for that. That brings us to the end of the public forum session. So just before I go into the first substantive item, which is the homelessness item, I forgot to say that I'm going to have a comfort break after this item. And that's going to be a very short break, but we'll do that. Okay, Julian, you would introduce the person who's going to very briefly take us through this, because we've had a very substantial member briefing on this, and of which there were lots of heads nodding, I was very pleased to say. So I think a general agreement with the direction of travel. Could you introduce the subject, and then we'll get on to asking you lots of questions about it.
Of course, and I remember the member briefing. It was very well attended, and some great questions asked by members. So yeah, I'd like to welcome Paul Sylvester, Head of Housing Options, who's going to talk about homelessness, but more specifically about our response to COVID-19 and the impact that has for us and our plans as a city to increase the amount of move on and coordinated wraparound support for people, because there's, in the midst of adversity, there is a tremendous opportunity here that we would like to seize. So over to Paul.
Thank you, Julian, and good morning, councillors. Good to see you all. As Councillor Negus has requested, I'm going to give a very brief overview to set the scene, maybe allow me 5 minutes, and leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. Okay, so I'm going to start with the challenge, and the challenge is that the levels of homelessness, and that's both rough sleeping, households in temporary accommodation, and people that are sofa surfing, in Bristol pre-COVID was already very high. The number of households approaching Bristol City Council for assistance with homelessness continues to increase, and we expect this trend to continue as the impacts of the pandemic are felt, with job losses, an increase in mental health issues, family relationship breakdown, and domestic abuse and violence. So that's the context, that's the challenge that we're working within. As we all know, homelessness is a complex and multifaceted issue that requires a coordinated response from a range of organisations. And I think that this city's homelessness COVID response has been a great example of organisations from across the sector working together with the City Council to get everyone in. And there are really so many people that have done amazing things that there isn't time now to mention them all. But a few things that I'm really proud of in terms of what we've achieved. Over 1,000 individuals housed in emergency accommodation over the last 6 months. 300 rooms in 5 hotels and hostels stood up in a matter of weeks. Accommodation provided for people with no recourse for public funds. Support provided by experienced and valued partners. Drug and alcohol services and health services wrapping around individuals. And over 100,000 meals delivered to people in hotels and emergency accommodation by the amazing Caring in Bristol initiative, Cheers Drive. But that said, the focus of the last few months has been on moving people on and reducing use of hotels. And as Julian mentioned earlier, we have 2 ambitious multi-agency initiatives with the aim of reducing homelessness and the number of households that need temporary accommodation and creating the conditions where no one needs sleep rough in Bristol. So first of all, our One City Move On project, which will deal with the bottleneck in supported housing, providing more accommodation for people who are ready to move on, freeing up valuable supported housing places for people that need that. And we'll do this by securing an ongoing supply of accommodation from various sectors to meet the long-term need. And there's lots of detail in the presentation that you have. And Change for Good. This project is a partnership between the City Council, the CCG and Golden Key. And the aim is to change how agencies in the city work together to support people with complex needs, starting with people who are homeless. And as I speak, there has never been so much focus on homelessness and mental health. We have a new homelessness social work team that has been supporting clients who've been placed in hotels. And there are a number of projects at early stages that will sit under Change for Good with a focus on mental health. Quickly, with funding, we've been successful in bidding for funding from government to support our efforts. We've got 1.9 million from Next Steps Fund to help with our emergency response. And we wait to hear about our bid for capital and long-term revenue support for new supported move on accommodation. But having said that, the funding provided by government simply isn't enough. There is also uncertainty around future government funding for homelessness from the next financial year. And our hope is that the level of funding that we currently get will be maintained and that additional funding will be made available to support people impacted by the pandemic, in particular private rented tenants. And one final thought for me is one of the big asks of government is that we have long-term funding, and we were hoping for a 3-year settlement this year, but with no autumn budget, this is looking unlikely. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of the 20 or so slides in the presentation. So,
and thank you for keeping it brief. Can I just ask members and the officers responding? We are in a currently very strange situation with regard to homelessness. Can we please phrase our questions and perhaps deal with answers in the immediate and the wider context as well, please, going forward? Thank you. Right, ready for questions. Who wants to kick off? Joe, and then I saw Carla after that.
Okay. How many households are in temporary accommodation at the moment, and how many are being housed outside of Bristol? And then my other question was about winter. What measures are being taken to prepare for winter, and how are those measures differing from the sort of, to the previous year when we didn't have the pandemic to deal with?
Okay. So we have over 900 households in temporary accommodation, but that includes everybody that we've been that has been placed in hotels, and we're also counting people that have no recourse to public funds. I think it's really important to have, you know, an overview of everything that's going on, rather than saying, okay, we're just reporting on this and we're not counting everybody. So over 900. In terms of number of people outside of Bristol, we average around about 10 to 12% of people in TA, but most of the people outside of Bristol are in the South Gloss Bristol fringes, and I think the furthest that we have anybody placed is in Severn Beach. So, you know, this isn't, you know, the experience of many London local authorities. We're not putting people in Stoke, we're not putting people in Newcastle. We're keeping them close to Bristol, and preferably with in areas with good transport links. In terms of the winter preparations, we're in the middle of that at the moment, and we're working with organisations around our severe weather protocol and what we're going to do for providing accommodation for people who are street homeless and making sure that it's COVID secure. We've been giving some guidance recently from the government around opening the possibility of opening shelters in a COVID secure way, and that's being reviewed at the moment by us and Bristol City Council public health colleagues. So what is certain is whatever we provide, Joe, will be in a, you know, COVID secure accommodation for people that are homeless.
Is that winter? Is there any extra money coming from the government for winter funding?
There are. It was announced. We had a letter recently around small pots of funding for winter pressures. Not a great deal, but we will be, as we always do, bid for every pot of money that we can get, because it helps more Bristol citizens.
Thanks.
Carla.
Thank you. So I've got two questions. The first one is about the graph, which is on slide 6. So that's the one titled "Everyone in, Move On," with the line graph. And my question is simply, is total move to settled accommodation part of the number for total move to pathways, or is that
it's separate? Yeah. So pathways accommodation is our commission supported housing, and where a number of people that we're working with and supporting aren't ready for independent living yet. So that's, you know, people into the settled is either social housing or private rented, and the pathways is supported housing.
I wasn't aware of the term pathways having a specific, like, meaning of a specific.
Sorry, it's jargon, and we should avoid it. But it's homelessness supported accommodation. We have around about 850 units of supported housing for single homeless people in Bristol. So that's adults. We have more for young people and more for families. And the reason why they're called pathways is because the idea is that people start off generally in a high support hostel and then work their way through supported housing, which is a pathway, into medium and low support, and then out on into independent living. And we have 4 pathways: one for men, one for women, one's mixed, and one for drug and alcohol treatment.
Okay, thank you for that. Sort of bonus question in that case. Don't worry for now, but I guess for future it would be great to de-acronymise and
absolutely
other things.
Absolutely, take that on board.
Slide 15 also had a few acronyms that I didn't immediately recognise, and I expect I wasn't the only one.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I know it's obvious to you, but we're looking over a much wider range of subjects. So
sure, absolutely, I'll make sure that anything I do in future is looked at in that way. Yeah,
thank you. Anyway, my other question is just an extremely broad one of, if I can ask bluntly, is there, I mean, it looks like you're doing really well. Is there anything that you're really worried about? Are there any, I mean, it looks like not enough funding is probably the main one, but I just wanted to hear from you if there's anything you're particularly worried about, any of the needs you've identified that are worried won't be possible to be addressed in time, and anything we can do as a commission to help with that.
Yeah. So the big variable here, which we're all concerned about, is how the impact of the pandemic plays out in Bristol in terms of on the economy, how that affects people in terms of losing work, and therefore the knock-on effect of people not being able to afford their rents in the private rented sector. So there's been a lot of research done by Shelter and Crisis, and there's been some information from district councils as well and other organisations that have given worst case scenarios about the number of people who may be threatened with homelessness. So that's not knowing how that might pan out in Bristol is a concern. We're speaking to the courts. We're getting oversight in terms of the number of landlords that are looking to seek possession. I mean, we do have some interim protections at the moment for people in the private rented sector who, so long as it's not antisocial behaviour, extreme rent arrears, or people who are perpetrators of domestic abuse, private landlords have to give longer notices, which does help. It also sort of kicks the can down the road a little bit in terms of any potential sort of surge in homelessness. So we're working really closely with the advice sector, and they're quite often people like Shelter, Avon and Bristol Law Centre, and Chaz are quite often, and the other area-based advice centres are the people where households go to first when they've got issues. So it's about, I guess, reading the rooms and seeing what's potentially going to happen in terms of the number of households that that may experience financial pressures and potential homelessness. But the key thing for us, and the key thing for the people of Bristol, is that help is sought early. We can do so much more, either us or our partner organisations, if people contact us early. We've got a greater chance of intervening, working with the landlord and saving a tenancy if it's not, people don't come to us at the last point. So part of this is around comms, and we've been doing good comms around that. But going back to your question, that's the thing that concerns me and colleagues of mine across the country in terms of the impact of the pandemic.
I think, yeah, just to add to that, thank you, Paul, very, very briefly. We have over recent years got a lot better at preventing homelessness, and we're getting much better in intervening earlier with people, and that seems to be working. The numbers we prevent every year goes up, but obviously the crisis gets worse and the housing crisis gets worse. I think it's really difficult to plan for this at the moment, this impact of homelessness in a situation where obviously national guidance on what's happening with people's jobs and lockdowns, etc., is changing daily. It makes it really difficult for us to plan what might happen. All we can do is to continue to try to prevent homelessness as much as possible. I would say the second big worry for us in terms of homelessness is also the financial strain that's going to be put on other parts of the system. As you know, we find our way out of COVID at some point, and budgets are more and more strained because of the burden on terms of things like council revenues and the amount of money available for charities and support agencies, etc. At a time when we've identified people need really good quality person-centred support to be able to maintain tenancies and stay in their homes, and financial and welfare benefit advice. And if they're not able to get that, that is again a significant risk, one, to homelessness, and two, to being able to put people in housing that they can maintain in a lot of cases.
Okay, thank you for that. Carla, are you happy with that?
That was very helpful. I would just flag up that I guess the end part of my question, which is there anything that we as a commission can do to help? Now, I know it's a bit unusual for us to so explicitly ask that, but if there is anything that, issues that you think the administration are not paying sufficient attention to, or that it would be helpful for us as a commission to, we have the power to submit statements to full council, to cabinet, to OSM, even to, write a letter to the government if necessary. So I guess perhaps over this discussion, have a think if there's anything like that you think would be helpful.
Sure. Matt, I saw your hand. Are there any other questions? Martin, I see.
Just
go again. Yeah.
Okay, just a couple of quick questions. Really, you mentioned, well, first of all, I think you've done a great job, and the report was very comprehensive. Thank you very much for that. You mentioned about securing ongoing supply of accommodation for various sectors. I was wondering to know what's the likelihood of that as we come out of COVID. I mean, it seems a big ask of us to be able to find accommodation for, to move forward when accommodation is in such short supply. Can you just make a comment on that, please?
Yeah, I'll come in on that, Paul, if I might. I think there is, I think, now an opportunity for us to, because of that, I think for a couple of reasons. One, because of the publicity that's been put on the Everyone In campaign and the plight of people who've been rough sleeping. I think there's now a national recognition that we need to do more, and that therefore, when we're talking to partner organisations and RPs and even ourselves as a landlord, there's a desire to give over a greater proportion of social housing lettings for move-on accommodation, because people recognise that that's a crisis. So we can increase the supply that goes directly to people needing in some form of temporary or emergency accommodation that need accommodation. Secondly, the change to local housing allowances back to the 30th percentile, in other words, what used to be housing benefit, but is now the maximum amount of that will be funded via either housing benefit or universal credit as the housing part of your benefits, has been increased to now back to the 30th percentile of the private rented sector, or the market rate. Prior to that, we had it was almost impossible to get people to find accommodation in the private rented sector, either through individual landlords or for people to invest and lease to us on our behalf. So that is a game changer that we need to capitalise on as soon as possible, and that's what we're trying to do now. So we're working to get more and more landlords to come forward. We are doing deals with large accommodation providers like Imperial Apartments, where we've got homes recently. We're talking to institutional investors because at the moment with interest rates so low, there's a really good market for investment in housing. And if people were to invest in a portfolio of properties, and we got nomination rights to those for guaranteed rents at local housing allowance levels, that gives a decent return to investors. So we think now there's actually more open to us in terms of housing opportunities than there was pre-pandemic, considerably. So we think we can get, but we have to be, we're trying to get into it now. And other things like next steps accommodation funding from the government. We're looking at commissioning new build, specific targeted move-on accommodation as well. So new schemes, some new modular schemes. It's never going to be easy, but we've got an opportunity now to make a step change in that increase in supply that's needed for move on. And it can't just all be social housing. Some of it has to be affordable housing in the market sector.
Okay, one more, please, Anthony.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned the £7 million capital funding, the bid for the government, and we're still waiting on that, I think. Just quickly, can you tell me what that capital funding would be used? The capital element of it. I think it was capital and revenue, but specifically, what won't go ahead if we don't get that fund, or is there something that won't go ahead?
Do you want me to answer that, Gillian? So, okay, so everything in that bid, everything listed in the capital funding is reliant on the funding coming through, apart from some units of accommodation in an existing city council development that we are converting into move-on accommodation. So we've got a number of properties that we're hoping as a landlord to convert and bring back into use, which need significant capital investment. And we've got partner organisations like St Mungo's who are looking to buy and acquire properties to house people, our client group, and that won't go ahead if we don't get the funding. The key bit here, actually, it is a great opportunity, and if it comes off, it will provide over 100 units of supported move-on accommodation, as well as supporting our efforts in Imperial Apartments. Is that alongside it, we get, it's about 3.5 years worth of revenue funding, which is unheard of in the homelessness sector. So what we get is a long-term commitment so that we can properly plan and commission support to enable people to sustain their tenancies, which is the thing that we keep asking government for.
I might also, I could just add very briefly. The difficulty with this first round of capital spend was there's a commitment that everything has to be spent by the 31st of March. That automatically knocks out a lot of new build, and we had to get together stuff that's about acquisitions and various other bits. Yeah. There will be more future rounds, and we can be more creative about adding to the council's housing, adding to the city's housing supply through investment in new properties in future rounds. But the timing of this and the constraints on the funding made it almost impossible to do that. Yeah.
Thank you,
Just
Martin.
One supplementary on that one.
Sorry.
Can you, in terms of the second round and potentially building our own council properties, is that where the modular homes comes in and the Festival of Ideals? Is that where we? I noticed that in the it's listed in the actual presentation. So will we be looking to modular homes in future bidding?
We're already building a lot of new council housing that is modular through some of the bigger schemes like Bucklock and Lidl and General Modular. What this is an opportunity for some smaller purpose-built schemes for Move On. So we're looking at two or three schemes which actually have quite small scale and maybe infill development, but work really well for especially younger people who need to move out into settled accommodation for a shorter period of time. There's some great bespoke solutions we're looking at, and we'll hope to get funding for those in future rounds. And part of the prospectus for the Move On funding is that modular bids will be looked on very favourably.
Thank you,
Martin. Then Joe.
Yes, thanks very much. It's been really informative, and there's so much information. It's really helpful. I'm trying to sort of piece together up to 5 things, which if I quickly list them, then you could hopefully be able to respond. Firstly, in terms of the funding, the sort of scale of the gap, I guess, is what's most worrying. And you presumably got a sort of best and worst case, or most likely, least likely sort of type of gap. Is it worth knowing, the implications of that? Secondly, you talked about voluntary reconnections in the report. Is just to be clear, is that this sort of negotiating with people with a sort of basically one-way ticket to where they might return? Because obviously that's had some publicity. Thirdly, in terms of the Imperial apartments, which has been in the news and you've just recently referred to again, obviously some worries and questions were raised based on the provider elsewhere. What's the sort of outcome that's emerging there? Hopefully the sort of concerns people have found emerging, but what stage have we got to in terms of how that's getting put in place? Fourthly, the conversions are mentioned, and again, that was just referred to in an answer. It refers to a care home or potential reuse of old care homes, but I'm also aware in the care sector, they're now talking about specialist care provision that's tailored to COVID exposed people. And so is there a competition for repurposing old care homes? I mean, does that affect what's available for homelessness? And unfortunately, one group or the other has to be provided for in any opportunity that there is. And finally, the trend with social housing is clearly down. You talked about the decade of sort of reduction of that availability, but also the rise of the private rented sector. At what point might we be able to replace that? And is the trend still going downwards? Because there have been a number of social housing projects, and you've referred to some there. So is one replacing the other potentially?
If I suggest, Paul, if you could answer the first couple of questions about funding and voluntary connections, and then I might come in with the rest. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So let me start off with voluntary reconnection. I think that's probably the most straightforward. So the key word here is voluntary. Yep. Absolutely. Nobody is being forced to leave Bristol. We're a welcoming city. We're a city of sanctuary. We take that very seriously, and all efforts are being made to try and enable people who want to live in Bristol as their home to do so. However, there are some situations where it just hasn't worked out for people, and then and they're requesting and need support in going back to the country that they've come from, and that's mostly EEA nationals, and we do provide that, although it is a challenge getting people's documents and passports and everything together in this current times. So the key thing here is voluntary, and we in no way share any information on anybody with the Home Office. Okay, just want to make that clear. In terms of the gap in funding, Martin, because I was writing all the other points down, which bit of funding are you referring to? Is that the bid funding that we're going for? Is it just
well, there's both. There's capital, there's revenue, because there are a lot of numbers in there.
There is, no, for
but
sure.
It's the scenario that gets us to where we're most likely to get to. You know, and I know it's really tough, but where does it look like? Where?
No, okay, yeah. So this year, combined government grants for homelessness, that's for rough sleeping and broader homelessness, is over £5 million. And at this point in time, I don't know what we're going to get for next financial year. Okay, so I do think, and it is most likely, that we will get I think a rollover budget, but with the pressures on other government departments, etc., who knows? But only recently, ministers in government are talking about homelessness, the importance of tackling homelessness. We're very close to the Ministry of Housing. They like what we do, and they think we do good work around homelessness. So I'm fairly confident that we should at least secure the same funding as we had this year. But the key thing here is that we need more money to do good prevention work, and that will depend on the scale and the impact of COVID. So I don't know if that's partly answers your question.
Can I come in on funding specifically?
Yeah,
before we leave that one. That I found it quite difficult to understand the implications between slides 16 and 17.
Yeah.
Some of them had huge numbers on them, and some of them were smaller numbers. I think if I was struggling, I suspect the public might be as well.
Yeah.
So could you perhaps just clarify that a bit, please?
Yeah, of course. Bronwyn, are you possible to get the slides up, and then that might...
I'm just looking, Paul, I'll tell you.
Okay.
So 16, 17, yeah, that's about next step funding. That's national next step funding. And then it goes on our funding. You then go on to talk about what funding we've had as a council.
Yeah, that's it. So 16 is the funding opportunity from the local, from the government to provide new accommodation with the aim of people not going back to the street after we've accommodated them. So that's across England. And then our funding is on 17. We just go down. And that's what we're expecting to spend in terms of our COVID response. The next two bullet points are the money that we have got back from the government to go towards that 4.8 million. And then, thrown in just to confuse matters is what we bid on as part of the next steps funding, which is new money. Okay, so we've got a shortfall on revenue funding this year in terms of our COVID response.
I think it's worth making the point that homelessness, I think, is one of the most difficult areas in terms of funding that I can think of, because the funding is just not one area. So in terms of homelessness funding, in order to prevent it, you're looking at investment to build new homes, and we've talked about that already today, and things like the spatial development strategy and issues like that. We're talking about prevention money, we're talking about support money, we're talking about money for hostels, universal credits and housing benefits, funding for mental health provision, funding for drugs and alcohol services, funding for specific initiatives like Housing First. So there's a whole range of pots of money, none of which are linked up. And it makes it really difficult at any point to know what you've got coming in, never mind the next year, for the next month sometimes. Which
well, that's kind of why I was wondering where these gaps and best case, worst case. It is a nightmare, isn't it? But
so it's in order to plan for what we can deliver. If you don't know what you've got for next year or next month, then how can you plan to deliver a service or set something up that's going to do that? And that's the difficulty. And I think that's what we want to try and do, partly with the Change for Good programme, which is work with all the agencies who do get funding, and say, actually, can we start to target that around the individual, the need of the individual, rather than the organisation providing it, and make sure that we build a team of support around individuals and need, and make access to everyone's records, that sort of things, which will help us.
Julian, are you still with us?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think we've lost you, Julian.
Have you?
Yeah, it froze for a minute there, just the last minute.
Yeah, just back again.
Apologies. That was my best bit, I think. So yeah, so I just said just the change for good thing. I think is I was just saying that in terms of the program, in terms of we need to work with all the agencies that are providing support and providing funding. If we work together with them and we build the service around the individual, then we'll be able to make what we have got go a longer way and plan a lot better in terms of how we use any funding that does come in. So that I think is really important for us.
Julian, could I ask you to answer the Martin's other points, and perhaps we can, Bronwyn, get rid of this slide so we can get that's fine. Thank you.
Imperial Apartments. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think we were aware going into the deal that Carridon, who are the owners of Imperial Apartments, had a less than savoury reputation in other parts of the country. We knew that, but you know, I think we were not in a position, if we could make it work, to turn down that scale of accommodation. So we went into it with a view of what can we do to make it work, knowing that there was a risk attached to it. So we did a lot of work as part of the deal with Carridon and fleshing out what would make it work for us. So making sure that we have support workers on site, making sure that we've got good quality management. We've got welfare workers on site. We've got community development workers accessing it. We're working with Carridon to improve the infrastructure at the site. So to put in place leisure facilities, to put in place hopefully a coffee shop, some training facilities, some IT facilities, gyms, a whole range of site facilities for people. The big difference for us at Imperial Apartments is that we're not using it as temporary accommodation like a lot of other Carridon properties are being used for. These are proper assured short-hold private rented sector tenancies for people. They're not there waiting to move out. They are homes. We want people to feel like it's a home. We want it to feel like it's a place somewhere can live. We are trying to create a blend through our lettings policy to make sure that we have some people, obviously, who are coming out of the hotels who may have some form of support needs, but also some people who are moving out of other forms of temporary accommodation, who are families or couples who have very low or no support needs, and also letting to some people in housing need in the local area as well. So we're not trying to put one client group in there. We're not trying to kind of store up problems. We're doing everything we can to make this a success for those people who live there. We recognise that, you know, that is an ask, but you know, my ask of the team, and Paul will back me up, is the moment we wanted to do this deal was we're only going to do this deal if we can make this a good place for people to live, and we can hold our heads up and say, you know, we're happy to move people in there, because if we can't, we wouldn't have done it. Never mind the number of homes it is, we just wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Martin, does that cover all your points?
There were a couple of other conversions and the sort of replacement of social housing and private rental.
Yeah, okay, so very quickly on the conversions, the majority of conversions we've bid for, in fact, all the conversions we've bid for are conversions of existing homes rather than in the Next Steps programs, rather than kind of care homes, etc. At one point, we were looking at some care homes that had been empty for some time,
right,
and that might come onto the market. And again, with the bidding round coming up and money being available, we thought, well, if it came up, we could get some money for it. As a matter of course, we're probably unlikely to pursue that avenue in the future. If we do so, the places we were looking at were not places that people were wanting at the time to grab and reconfigure, I think, for any other use. They'd passed their sell-by date as any form of care accommodation, and we needed them for different stuff. But most of the conversions, I think, are individual street properties, both our own and some from other RPs that needs significant investment. And we'll continue to look for those, because they actually offer some really nice properties in those portfolios. Social housing versus PRS. Obviously, the PRS has been increasing in recent years in Bristol. It's now over 30% of the housing market. The point I need to distinguish is the amount of social housing and the amount of lettings available.
Yes.
So We are gradually increasing the amount of social housing, and our new build programme for council housing will make sure that we have a net gain of council housing, hopefully every year for the next few years. The amount of lettings has gone down because the amount of mobility between sectors has changed. So with there being a wider gap between the social housing sector and the market rate and the PRS sector, people have not been, the pattern of people moving between sectors has changed adversely over the last 5 or 6 years. So same number of property, less moves, I think is the message. And you know, ideally, again, another reason we were campaigning for the local housing allowance rate levels to change, because that will again help mobility within those sectors as well.
Okay, I think
that's been really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Joe.
Sorry, just on that last point, Julian, about you said about a net gain of housing, council housing. Does that mean that we'll have more council houses coming in versus the ones that go out on right to buy? Is that what you mean?
That's my ambition.
Okay, great. That's good.
If we can get all the properties that are in our current pipeline over the next 5 years, then we will achieve that.
That's good. And then some other questions. One about the when you mentioned about you briefly touched on evictions and how you might be able to slow down the process. You said that you mentioned a few exceptions. Obviously, one was antisocial behaviour, and then another one was about extreme rent arrears. And I just wondered what you meant by extreme rent arrears. And I mean, I could imagine that anything that predated COVID would be an issue, but obviously extreme if people haven't been able to pay their rent for the whole time.
No, that doesn't come into extreme rent arrears, Joe. I mean, okay. when we talk about extreme rent arrears, we're talking about people that we've been working with for years, and it's generally people who we know have the means to pay.
Okay.
But have not willfully chosen not to pay over a long period of time. And unfortunately, we do have some people who just run up thousands and thousands of pounds worth of debt by thinking that it'll all go away. And we try to work with people. You know, Paul's Welfare Rights and Money Advice Service works with people. We try our view is to maximise people's incomes, not to try and get money off them. You know, or try and just badger them for money. We do try and work with people and reach out to people, but there are some cases where that's just not, it just doesn't happen, and it's willful non-payment.
Okay, and then a couple of other things. You, Matt, mentioned about the idea of the housing festival as a way of getting some housing built more quickly, and I didn't really sort of pick up a response to that, because I know there was that mention of 31st of March as a deadline for spending the money, the capital funding. Had that been considered as is it just not an option to knock up some modular housing in that time, or is it just seen as not being the sort of financially?
No, it's an option. It's not actually the construction that takes the time. We would have to go through planning, we would have to go through development control, we'd have to go through groundwork, site investigations, because actually one of the things we do know is, as pioneers of modular housing in this country, and especially modular housing for social rent, the building is not the long bit.
Okay, that's fair enough. I just wanted to check.
Process, all the other bits take a while. So whilst we looked at any possibility to get some modular schemes in, we couldn't do it, but we will in subsequent rounds. There are some schemes that we're already planning.
Right, and then just the other one, I mean, this is a slightly more awkward one, and maybe it's something to take away. It's about what's it called? The move, I can't remember what it's called now. Move on, not move on. Change for good, sorry, change for good. Talking about, I think it would be really useful to get a bit more information about the actual work that is being done with people with mental health issues and any substance and alcohol issues, because I always got the impression that a lot of the reason that people can't stay in housing is because those issues are not being managed properly. So it's not really a housing issue, it's more a support support issue, and I would just like a bit more information, perhaps a little bit more information about the programs that are going to be happening, so that we can see that this is really going to be different from before.
Yeah, what needs to make it different is that people, and this is something we experience through people working with people like Golden Key and looking at the experiences of people with quite complex needs, and that includes obviously people with history of drug and alcohol abuse and mental health issues, is that the system is essentially stacked against people, especially those people who won't engage with the system often. Because of funding constraints and because of a necessity to make sure that people can try and access services. Services are restricted to people, and it's very easy to drop people, and therefore their eligibility criteria for some services are quite strict, or once you've failed to engage, then you're dropped again. So what we need to get to, and of course, if you think about that across each agency approaching you in a different way, and having to tell your own story and engage with each agency separately that you might be dealing with. If you're in a position where you're someone with complex needs, that's well nigh impossible. So what we're trying to do through Change for Good is move to something which says, actually, let's take that person, build a team around them of all of those at various support agencies that they need, and make sure that that is managed for them as and when they need it, so that they can't kind of fall between them or through the net or whatever, and keep regressing to patterns of difficult behaviour. So it is complex. It's a really difficult ask, I think, because resources are still scarce. Despite that, there's not going to be really any increase in resources to do that. What we have to do through the programme is coordinate most effectively the resources that are available, and I think also make a really good and strong argument for investment in these preventative and early intervention services, because they stop really, really expensive acute interventions at a later date with people that do result in prison stays or long stays in hospital that are avoidable, frankly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I raise a couple of very quick points and then a broader point, if I may? The two quick points are that you are strategically talking about prioritizing people moving from out of supported housing into the private rented sector and other accommodation in order to, backfill some space for other people. I'm always very concerned about prioritization because, whatever the priority is at the moment, everyone agrees with it, but there's loads of other priorities as well. And, deeply aware of the fact that there are huge different pressures on getting people into the system and housed. Do you want to moderate that comment that this is the priority? Because what happens about everybody else?
I think I think what we're basically saying is, for too long, we've had a system whereby people cannot move out of the temporary or emergency accommodation they find themselves in when they should be moving out and when they're ready to move out and live in settled independent accommodation of their own. And that's been a massive bottleneck to our housing market in Bristol. What we're aiming to do is redress that situation, primarily by finding more move-on accommodation for those people, rather than increasing the competition for the existing amount of social housing. Yes, we do need to increase the amount of lets to that group of people, but that's only by a few percent. The Move On project is primarily about finding new sources of move-on accommodation that weren't available to people before.
Okay, so you're saying that the priority within the Move On project is to clear supported housing, not the priority.
Not to clear it, to allow those people who are in it, who have been stuck in it for too long because there's not been anywhere for them to move to actually find homes for those people, so the system actually operates in the way it was designed to operate.
Okay, thanks. The second quick question is, although I'm aware that the government required local authorities to clear all rough sleepers, or as much as they possibly could off the streets because of the risk of infection. Can you tell me if there are any types of people for whom longer term we as a local authority have no obligation? And the follow-up to that is, what on earth happens to those people?
Paul?
Want me to? So, okay, so there's a couple of things here. When you're talking about obligation, I think of two things. One is around people who aren't eligible for homelessness assistance because of their immigration status.
Yeah.
And is that what we're talking about here?
Well, that's certainly one of the groups I would see as a risk group. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with those. So, we've housed a number of people in hotel and emergency accommodation where we wouldn't normally provide accommodation for them because they're not eligible, and that's because of the COVID emergency response, because of our response to this public health emergency. We have the same aim for this group of people as we do for everybody, and that we don't want anyone to return to the streets. But you're quite right, it is really tricky. So early days, we started engaging with the refugee sector in Bristol, which is very strong. There are a lot of good organisations in Bristol working with people that are refused asylum seekers. So whether that's Bristol Refugee Rights, Bristol Hospitality Network, the Red Cross, lots and lots of organisations. And we've been meeting regularly with them, looking at individual plans for people that we're currently accommodating. And there've been lots of great work done. Some people are now eligible for assistance. Some people are eligible for Home Office support. Other people are going to be accommodated by the voluntary sector whilst they appeal their asylum decision. But there will be some people where they've come to the end of the line in terms of their ability to appeal asylum decisions. And that is a very difficult place, I think, for us and for the sector, and that we have to have some difficult conversations with people about their options, and they are limited. So that's the time when there were conversations around, reconnections. Very, very challenging. And with EEA nationals, so European nationals who currently need to be working to be eligible for support, we've commissioned a service that's looking to get people into work, so providing the training and access to support to get into work. And the advice sector were funded to provide specialist advice around that. And we're working really hard to get people settled status where that's appropriate. But again, whilst there'll be lots of successes, there will be a group of people where that isn't possible, where difficult conversations need to be had, and there is the option of voluntary reconnection. What we don't want, but the risk is there, is that people return to the streets.
I agree, and those you identified those as the two key risk areas of groups of people. Okay, can I then go on to the bigger question? What conversations have there been held within Bristol City Council, and there's certainly conversations across the country and elsewhere, about housing first, about the actual long-term economics of solving this problem by putting money in, which saves money further down the line? Has there been any papers or anything recorded of those sorts of options?
Yeah, we have a housing first program in Bristol, of which I'm on the board of it. It's run through Golden Key. It's now in its third tranche of activity. So it works again with people who have really deeply entrenched histories of rough sleeping and difficult behaviours. It's been relatively successful so far. We stay quite close to the original model, which means it does take an awful lot of wraparound support. Once someone's got a property, for them to stay in it, we accept there's going to be a failure rate, and we accept it's not a solution for necessarily everybody who's in a rough sleeping situation or an emergency housing situation. But we are, you know, it is quite a successful program to date. I think it's housed, Paul may know more than I am, I think it's housed roughly about 30 odd people so far.
Yep.
I'll give you an example of the kind of people that's housed. I mean, I think the person who's been in their longest at the moment, who's been in for about 18 months in their home, was a rough sleeper who'd been on the streets for over 20 years. And although they were given and let a property of their own, it took them 6 months before they would spend the night indoors in it, because that was too scary an experience for them. It took them over a year before they were able to feel comfortable sleeping in a bedroom. So that just indicates the level of kind of support and help that people need to be able to maintain tenancies in that housing first model. It's a great model. It's working for a lot of people. We're asking to expand it in the next steps funding we've put in. So we've put a bid in to expand the program. We use dispersed street properties. A lot of other housing first pilots across the country actually use blocks, which we don't subscribe to, because that puts an awful lot of people together and doesn't really feel like people's own accommodation. It just feels like an extension of a hostel or something like that, whereas we use individual street properties that are given by the council or by other RPs. And again, trying to convince other RPs to give up properties when there's a worry about the long-term nature of the support funding that comes with it has been an issue. So again, we welcome, as Paul said earlier, a government announcement of three years plus worth of support funding. That would go a long way to increasing the amount of homes we could offer under Housing First.
Julian, there seems to me laudably about trying to solve really difficult problems in a different sort of way. Picking up what you said earlier about the fact that this is a very disparate problem. It's a problem which, you know, has lots of different agencies and sources of finance and, in fact, sources of clients. Is the Housing First financial model, which is the long-term solution to housing need, is that something, I'll go back to what I said before, is that not something that requires the remodeling of our approach to this problem? If we're really going to take this on board, then aren't we going to be dealing with something which needs us to rethink the way we approach this problem? I'm picking up what Carla said earlier about how can we recommend something that needs to change in order to bring forward lasting change here.
Yeah, Housing First is a good example. I mean, it is one solution. It's not the solution, but it is certainly one solution. I still honestly think what will bring about lasting change is the ability to provide the right amount of help, support, financial advice to individual people that suits them when they need it, because there's this expectation that support tails off after a period. It doesn't. People have different crises as they go through life, especially if they've come from a kind of trauma experience background, which a lot of people have. What would be, I think, the most significant change we could make is an approach like Housing First, which said that we will build what is needed around the individual. At the moment, systems do not do that. And if we could get long-term guaranteed help, assistance and support around the needs of the individual with long-term funding that was ring-fenced for that particular activity, then I think that would be a massive, massive step, and probably the single most important step. I don't know if Paul agrees with me on that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I hope he does.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, no, we're all on the same page with that.
Okay, that might be the right place to end this, unless anyone's got any further points that they want to raise. Oh, do I see? Sorry, John. John, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, you'll be pleased to know I don't actually have any further questions because my questions were covered in your answer to Matt's questions. But I just wanted to say thanks for this session and for I found this really much better than a lot of the other scrutiny sessions we've had, because we've had a chance to have loads of questions, and I just found it really useful. So thanks for that. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm pleased about that. I too think that we've had a lot of exposure as members to this really, really big problem, which I think is frankly an issue of pride for our city. And I think the way it's been dealt with, it has been dealt with in a full way, and if I may say so, in a sensitive way as well. Rarely do I read reports where it seems that the officers are genuinely caring for the problems that they're going through and trying to get to grips with them. So I'm very grateful for that series of reports. I've been very impressed with the answers we've had today, and I think on behalf of all of us, I wish you well. And if, going back to Carla's point, if indeed we can provide any support or any vehicle for getting these messages across, and any change that you feel is necessary across, you be sure to come back to us, because I think that's part of our role, to make sure we can try and strengthen the good things that this council is doing as well. So thank you both very much, and please pass that on to your team, for which I know have been going through very difficult times, and we're all very grateful for the way this is being dealt with sensitively. So thank you very much. I'm going to end that session now. There's now going to be a 5-minute break. Now, before we go away, Bronwyn, do we simply just, how do we get back in again?
It'll all be timed. It's 11:27 now, so if we ask people to resume at 11:32, I'll be putting up a sign to remind people, and I'll give everyone a 1-minute warning as well.
And literally, the screen is still here. We just pop up again on the screen.
Absolutely.
That's great. See you all in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a drink, Bronwyn. Oh, typing. You all right?
We're still live, Joe.
Oh, are we? I thought so. I thought the actual volume had paused. Okay.
We'll resume in 1 minute. Okay, it's now the end of the comfort break. I guess we'll wait for another couple of minutes for people to return.
Okay, I think we're enough of us here. Welcome to the second half of the Community Scrutiny Commission. We're about to embark on the conversation around the Moving Forward Together paper that's in the papers, and I'm going to ask Julian, right for you, Julian, to make a brief presentation, and then we'll move into questions.
Of course, thank you. I'd like to introduce Rob Swift, who is Programme Manager for the Moving Forward Together programme, which is our transformation programme for how we change how we deliver our services to our customers based on what they've told us matters most to them. So it's an important and massive change, and I'm pleased to say it's a programme that's using co-design between officers and colleagues as a way to bring about these changes in design. So I'll say no more at this point, but over to Rob, who hopefully is going to keep it brief like we did with the last session, then we've got plenty of time for questions.
Exactly right. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I know that some of you would have seen some of the content of this previously as well. Bronwyn, how's it best to do this? Do you share the slides, or is it easier if I just do that?
I'm quite happy to do so. You're quite welcome to as well, and
Okay.
that way you'd have control of
That's fine.
the rate you go as well. So entirely up to you.
All good. I'm happy to share. Just wanted to know how you usually do it. That's all. Thanks. Okay. Bear with me. I'll get this on full view in a second. Okay, I'm going to take you through a set of slides just to provide a bit of an overview from the programme. I know that some of you would have attended a councillor briefing we did early in September as well. So as we suggested, I'll provide a quick overview and leave plenty of time for questions. Contents, a bit of background, a reminder of why we're doing this, a bit of an overview of how we've been doing a design of an operating model, look at the vision for our service, and a bit on next steps. So this is just a reminder that back in 2019, we did a large survey of 3,300 of our residents. This is a significant number, far more than we normally get responses for, and the output of that derived six, how did I forget that? 6 priorities: local, listening, easy to contact, we keep our promises, we improve the safety, improve security across our service and across our estates. I'm going to go into a bit of co-design and lockdown and say how we've been doing this. It's been a huge effort. It's been great to see. We've had lots of input. So over 100 individual co-design events of a scale that I don't think we've seen before. Every team within Housing and Landlord Services would have inputted into that. Every single team. We've also had 16 resident engagement events and local housing forums over September and October. And we've also done 3 further resident surveys with a focus group. That's helped us get some more input into specific areas. At the point where I created this slide, we were planning a Facebook Q&A event, and we may well do in the future. It just hasn't happened within the time period that we'd expected at that point. But we do have an intention to do more events with residents as we progress. Just go over a vision for our service. It repeats a little bit of the priorities, but it's our statements in response to what our residents have told us are important to us. I won't read every bullet point, but there's we're more local. We'll have teams that are focused in local communities. So we're able to build more positive relationships and also tailor our services to those communities. Listening is absolutely critical, that we show and we are listening to our residents and we hear what they say. That's both at a citywide and a local level to design the services they need us to deliver. And easy. We're completely redesigning how we deliver our services. We're making our housing officer as the main point that our residents can contact us, and we're increasing the access to information. Trust at the heart of what we're doing. We're working at a local level to develop strong and lasting relationships with resident communities. We're looking at how we do tenant participation and are conducting regular satisfaction surveys in the future. And then on to safety. A key part here is how we tackle and work together with police and or other organisations to deal with crime and antisocial behaviour. And then lastly, security. We need to work with residents to ensure our homes and estates are safe and secure. In doing so, obviously listening to what they say that would make communities safer, and looking at practical and tangible physical ways we can make homes and estates more secure. So that's the view of our response to what they said, what our residents have told us. And now what we've done through that co-design is we have an emerging operating model, which we'll complete in the next couple of weeks. We'll complete that operating model. We'll be reviewing the output of that with wider stakeholders, and we'll be seeking approval for the full business case at the Corporate Leadership Board on the 15th of December. So we've got a lot of work to do between now and then to pull all of that together. During that time, we're planning how we'll test the operating model. So in the new year, we'll have a pilot running in one area of the city where we'll test all of the design that we've put together with our staff and with the residents, and we'll drive that and refine that again. And then following that, we'll be in a confident place to be delivering that. We don't have a start date for the pilot yet. We know it'll be early in the new year, and the outcome of the proof and concept, that will allow us to refine the operating model. And we aim to complete the majority of the work by the end of 2021. There is a more detailed plan on the next slide, but which I provided if you wanted to have a look at that. I'm not going to talk us through it, and I'm going to stop here and leave that open to questions.
That's great. Thank you very much for that very rapid run through. Bronwyn, I think it would help me if I had the full screen back, so I've got everyone's faces in front of me. Thank you very much. If we need to go back to anything, we'll just have to pop back into it as and when. So Thank you very much for that. Can I now invite questions, please? I've got John first. Off you go, John.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. For those of us who've followed these things, all this looks, remarkably familiar, and to things that have gone in the past. And I'm not a cynical person, but I'd just be interested to know why what would be different this time to all the other strategies we've had over the last 10 to 15 years, which have said very similar things. So that's the first question. The second question is just pulling out of the presentation, is you mentioned that you're going to make services more visible in communities. Would you be able to expand a little bit on that as well, please? Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that?
No, I'm happy to take that. Thanks, Rob. I sincerely hope this is significantly different, John, than most change programs that we've had for a couple of reasons. One is that we've got a very, very powerful mandate from our residents as to what they want us to deliver. So we surveyed everyone. We've got 3,500 responses back from our residents, which is massive in terms of survey terms. And they came up quite clearly with the things they want from us. We may have thought we knew those in advance, but actually having that mandate from people is massive, and it was those 6 priorities. So we desperately need to make sure on behalf of our residents now that we do something that meets that. I think where this is also different is this is a programme of co-design that I don't think we've tried before in Bristol, where we've taken those priorities and asked colleagues from all across the service to design what the new service should look like, rather than managers and directors and heads of service. The service is being designed by the people who are going to be delivering it. That's going to make hopefully a very powerful difference in terms of what that means for people. I think also it's being, the programme is being effectively managed and resourced. We are building up, Rob's been working, and the team have been working really, really hard on this to make it a reality. We are putting in place, dedicated HR teams, dedicated learning and development teams, because upskilling people is going to be absolutely essential for this programme. But I think the second thing I would say is, we've been very clear from all the way through this, that this programme is not about structures and organisations and who does what. This is about rebuilding a relationship with our residents. It's about changing our values and our attitudes and our behaviours to make sure that we do design a service around residents, and that's appropriate. And I think that's a strong message. In terms of visibility, I think one of the things that residents have been saying for some time, and what was confirmed by the survey, was that residents miss being able to see and know and have a relationship with the people who are responsible for managing their estates, both in terms of maintenance and especially a housing officer role. What we're not trying to do is go back to a series of having fixed local teams based in a team. What we are based on a locality, we're trying to do that virtually. So we're trying to make sure that we empower people to have a kind of, it's best looking at this almost from a resident point of view. If I live in a block of flats in say South Bristol, who do I know that's responsible for my estate? Who's the person who's going to do it? Do I have a relationship with them? Do I see them on a regular basis? Do I trust them? Do I know that they'll be able to, if I ask them something, they'll be able to sort it out for me? We weren't at that place. We're not at that place now. So that's what visibility means. But we can do that through technology, through allowing people to operate effectively out in the field and out on our estates, spending more time there, being visible, coordinating the services, but at the same time operating in a modern and sophisticated way with agile management. So it's going to be a significant change. We've just got to make it happen, and that is, that's still a difficult ask. But I think the pilot approach will help us to define and refine what that model should look like.
And you mentioned that you're going to empower local employees to make the change they need.
Yes.
Is that going to, how significant a change in job role do you think that'll be in terms of responsibilities for officers?
It's not going to be a massive change in job role. They will take on more responsibilities, because one of the things we wish to do is reduce specialisms, because that's annoyed people when they have to ring up several people to residents having to ring up several people to get one thing done or 2 or 3 things done. So what we want is somebody to take ownership of all those issues at the first point, really. So what we need to do with that is upskill some people so to take on some of those specialist functions. But what we also need, of course, is for people to be responsible for the right number of properties to be able to exercise that function appropriately. So there's no point setting people up to fail by giving them a task that's too massive. They need to have the right number of properties to manage, the right number of people to have of households to have a relationship with to make it work. And again, we know that'll be significantly less than current housing officer patch sizes because we're putting everything together. The pilot will help us to refine what the exact kind of figures are and what the variables that we'll need to take into account in any given area of the city are.
Happy with that, John?
Yeah, thanks for your responses. I didn't want to come across as sort of, as say, cynical or anything, and I obviously wish you well in doing this, but there's a lot to be doing here, and a lot of detail I hope we'll be able to get out in this session. Thanks.
Martin.
Yes, thanks very much. I appreciate all of the background information, the full business case and the cabinet briefing. I was concerned at one point that we were going to get a sort of presentation and sort of standard briefing that had already been done. And I really appreciate we got like much fuller information to understand this. So thanks for that. My concern is actually not about the proposals and you know the objectives, which I certainly hope it's all very effective and successful. It's that what it means is there's certain bits of investment, bits of change, bits of restructuring or retraining, reorganization, and from experience that leads to sort of discontinuity and sort of gaps and hiccups while people then move, people find roles are changed, posts have moved, structures have altered, you have to be inducted, you have to understand the new culture, get the new training. And there are risks at that point, risks for the service that hopefully only short term, but they could mean a sort of worsening of the experience, some gaps and so on before it gets better. And I just want to understand, through this sort of scrutiny discussion, how that's being managed as well. It's the management of the change to make it work without those sort of blips in the service or, experiences that get worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, you're right. There's always a risk of that in any program of this nature and this size. I think that's clear. I mean, obviously, that's one reason that we're not going for a kind of big bang approach across the city, because that would, that would have the potential, if it went wrong, for, a significant detrimental effect on services, which is what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, everything from the sort of software and the people and everything.
Yeah, and there are, one of the things is we have several strands of, and Rob might be able to discuss this in more detail. We've got several strands of activity or work streams within the programme aimed at minimising those impacts and aimed at making sure that people are ready and not working and put into a situation where they're not ready for that, and whereby, from day one, they'll be able to operate effectively. So, for instance, if you're, say, a housing officer or a site manager or something like that, or a repairs surveyor, there'll be a number of modules of kind of learning and stuff that you will have to have gone through, very much like in order to be a social worker, you need to have passed various modules to be able to call yourself qualified. We'll be doing the same thing. We want to almost professionalise the service a lot more. But Rob, do you want to come in on that?
I think the only additional thing to say is we are working already and have been for the last couple of months with our colleagues in HR and with learning and OD and with comms and with colleagues in IT, and we meet at least twice a week. We've got some quite lengthy planning sessions booked in over the next few weeks to work through all of that. And I think in previous projects that I've worked on, we haven't necessarily engaged them to the depth that we have with this one. Particularly at this stage, we might have engaged them a bit, and then fully engage them after the full business case. But I think it's telling that we've got them, up front 2 or 3 months before we've even submitted a full business case. So when we do that, we know that we have full sign up from all the people we need from across the organisation that can help us do this.
And I think, just to add to that, I think we've done more resident engagement as we've gone through design, and again, the feedback from residents is that we're on the right track with what they would like to see, and they're building in, actually, this is what we want from this role, this is what we want to see on our estates, etc. So hopefully, whilst we can't rule out there being any hitches, if we're in the right direction and we've got the right values and ethos behind it and the support of our residents, it will make it easier.
Yeah, and the comms to know, like, when it is live, when it's in place, and not before, I suppose, as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. I think I saw your hand go up. Before I bring you in, was that right? Did you put your hand up? No? Okay. Right. In that case, I've got a clear run. I was going to say quite a lot of what John said. Don, okay, I'll bring you in a moment, Don. Thank you. I was going to say quite a lot of what John said, but I was going to leave it to the end because I was quite sure that everyone would be very enthusiastic about this program, as indeed am I. But there needed to be some, recognition that this has been done before. This is the third time it's been across my desk, and one of them, it was actually my desk that it started with. I'm aware of all of the things. 5 out of the 6 things that you've come forward with were what I came forward with, and quite a few of the things within the program are the things that I highlighted as being absolutely essential. And yet, it's not been achieved. So what I'm particularly interested in is the role of the delivery partner that you've highlighted here, which is obviously going to cost us some money, but I'd like to know exactly what they're doing. And I hope that what they're going to be doing is making sure that all these wonderful words turn out to materialize in real good. And the second thing I'd be interested to follow up is that I inherited a system which is very much Big Brother. We're not there now, I'm very pleased to say, but I don't feel we're still moving far enough away from that. If this is going to work, like with anything else, people have got to feel a part of this and make it work from within rather than have stuff done to them. So could you answer those 2 points, delivery, the delivery partner, and the way this is going to work with people?
Yeah, I mean, can I answer this? I might try and answer the second bit first, which is
in your own way.
Which again is, and then ask Rob to come in on the delivery partner. But hopefully, why this works is we didn't want this to be a Big Brother. We didn't want this to be a top-down change. What I've wanted to do since I got here was identify what wasn't working, and then give people an opportunity to change that, to give our residents an opportunity to say what's not working, and to give my colleagues throughout housing the opportunity to design something that they thought could work, which is why the design of this programme has not featured myself, it's not featured my leadership team in the design. It's been something that's been carried out between the project team, our delivery partner, and a representative sample of people from across housing and landlord services. So co-design group of I think around about 20 odd people in the first place, with a review group of about 30. Again, people who volunteered and put themselves forward to do this, and willingly took part in designing the future of the service for them and their colleagues and our residents. It has come from within, and I think one of the other things, again, I think that we've identified is that there is, I think probably has been in the past, too much control of what colleagues do and not enough empowerment and accountability given to colleagues to be able to do that, and support to be able to do that. So the big change we want to do is to make sure that people have got the tools, the equipment to do the job, to make the decisions, and that they are supported and backed and enabled to do that rather than told what to do. And that's got to come out of this to make it a success. So I think it is that hopefully puts us on the right path. I mean, don't forget, we're a service of over 1,000 people and we've 29,000 homes. So not everyone's going to come along right from the outset, but we're trying to create the conditions in which we can do that optimally at the moment. Rob, do you want to come in on the...
Mute myself. Yeah, I think our delivery partner is, in short, is helping us with providing the experience of conducting a huge transformation program of this scale across 1,000 people within, they have a relevant sector experience as well, and have been providing the additional capacity. I think that's needed to be able to do what we're doing. I mean, I'd love to think that we'd be in a place where we can, change this ourselves. But reality is that actually we need that extra capacity. We need that experience. Over the course of the next year, we'll be working with them. So they're coaching and building our own internal capacity. They'll be helping us build our leadership capacity. They'll be helping us build our change management capacity. They'll be helping us put in place something like even running a pilot in one area is quite complicated. There's lots of individual pieces to think about, and having their support and experience by our side is absolutely critical for us to be able to do this, and also to do this in the kind of timescale that we're aiming to. So
Okay,
yeah.
So if the delivery partners are there mainly to work with your team to make them more fit to deliver this program, how are you going? They're obviously, it's not them that's going to do this. So who is going to test how the success and the performance of this new approach? Are we going to have a regular assessment? Will it be brought back to scrutiny? Will it be reported to cabinet papers? How will we know so that it doesn't just wither on the vine like previously done?
What we're doing at the moment is, first of all, we're doing a significant piece of work on benefit realization from the operating model, and that'll be detailed, show you where the benefits are, and we'll also be developing a suite of success measures that will be starting to be used immediately from the pilot. So we'll be using those success measures to just judge the success of the pilot as we go through. Another thing that we will be doing is, when we're working in that area initially, we'll be engaging with residents and asking them directly, like, is what we're doing now meeting the expectations and what you told us in the survey? Is it better than what we did before? And getting that input to help us refine and perfect what we're doing. So yeah, coupled with the full business case on the 15th, will be a full benefits realization plan and a suite of success measures that will judge the program against.
And that will be public so that we can see that.
Yes. Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again, Rob.
Hi.
And it gives me a great deal of confidence to see you in this role. My first reaction is taking it at face value. I feel like I've seen something I've been waiting to see for about 4.5 years. And I'm delighted because what I see that residents have said is the things I have picked up from residents as well, and have found difficult to feel that they're not quite correct in those perspectives, really. So I'm looking forward to working with you on this, and we'd be delighted, I'm sure, to host any pilot in Avonmouth and Lawrence Western Ward. In fact, probably annoyed if it went anywhere else even. About people wanting that kind of local visibility. Very keen that that could mean several things. On one end of the spectrum, it could mean a line drawn on a document somewhere on that in our internal processes. And there's another end of the spectrum that I think people are talking about really, is actually wanting to know the person and to be able to get access to that person. Perhaps not just even with their housing needs, but with a wider breadth of needs. And I really hope we can help to bring that about. And I wouldn't, yeah, I mean, even if we aren't going to return to housing offices, I'm sure, and that's probably not desirable, but we do have community buildings and community organisations, and there are real synergies actually with housing officers being linked in to those and making themselves available at those, and building themselves into the wider life of the community, because I don't think you can, especially in a place like Lawrence Weston where people are living quite distant from the centre, it's difficult to separate their housing needs often from the other wider life needs, as you know. But I'm just kind of making that point that you're probably going to hear that again from me. But on the positive, I'm really keen to work with you on that in our ward.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? I've certainly got more. Joe?
I don't know if you just can't see me, Anthony, on your screen, but I had my hand up.
I'm so sorry. You know, I have a few problems, Joe. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be negative, but it does feel a little bit like one of my kids' Christmas lists, this. It feels like absolutely everything. We want this, we want that. And actually better than my kids' Christmas list, because it is things that people actually need. But I'm just worried about how we're going to be able to deliver them with the limited resources we have. And I think the biggest concern I have is around the role of our staff and the intense what it appears to me is very staff intensive, and that's always been a big problem, because the cost, that's our single biggest cost by a long way. And I just feel like I'd like to see some evidence of how this is going to work in practice, in terms of how much it's going to cost, and in terms also of the resilience of staff, because we know in the past there have been quite high levels of sickness. I think it's a very stressful job, you know, giving somebody a named contact. Is that person always going to be available? If not, who are they going to speak to? But also that, from the point of view of the contact, some of the people they're going to have on their list are going to be quite challenging individuals, and they are going to kind of be put in a position where they've got to deal with that person all the time. So I think that is quite difficult. And then the other issue is, I still think we need some clarity about how contact is going to be made, because you talk about the sort of it being a personal thing, but also you talked about technology. And I know that a lot of the blocks are not, not everybody has access to broadband, Wi-Fi, whatever, and for them to be able to make contact with a housing officer is going to be quite a challenge. So I can't see how this could go forward without some, without the sort of work on connecting housing, our council housing up. It's that being stepped up quite significantly, because I know there's a few pilots around, but I'm sorry to be negative, because I do want this to work, but I just do feel that we need to know more and be able to see how it's going to work, bearing in mind it's going to be very resource intensive.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I mean, it is going to be resource intensive. We make no bones about that. The idea is that we're putting our resources where they're needed, rather than where they're not, or rather than duplicating resources.
Sorry, Julian, can I just butt in again then? So where are those resources now? What is it that's not needed?
It's not that it's not needed, it's that it's being used, it's how well it's being used, I think is the part. It's, you know, we only, I mean, as members, you know, from your own complaints, you'll know sometimes how difficult it is for people to access services. How difficult it is for people to get consistent responses, or to be able to get hold of someone, or how many times it takes us to come back to do a repair sometimes before we get it right. That's expensive. That's really expensive. You know, it's what we need to do is make sure that we've got the people there to be able to sort out these problems at the first time of asking. And it's not about there being one way to contact us, or about one way. It's about giving people a choice, and a choice that works. So, you know, what we've said is that anyone you contact, whichever way you contact them, should have access to all of your details and should be able to answer your query. At the moment, that's not the case. And people often just go, I'm sorry, I'm not dealing with that. You'll have to ring X, Y, and Z, or talk to such and such. We need to eliminate that. That's really poor. It really annoys our customers. It certainly annoys me. And I don't want that to continue. So we want that range of access. So people, if they choose to, if they want to access our services overnight, they can do that by digitally or whatever. If they choose to ring us up, they can do that. If they know that a housing officer's got a surgery in their block on a Thursday, they can pop down and see the housing officer. They can message us via social media. You should get a great response every time you do one of those things. Our aim is to make sure that, you know, actually we make ourselves more efficient cost-wise over the longer term by doing this. We think we can do that because of the way that people will choose to access services, because of our ability to get it right first time, and the ability to deploy our resources more effectively. I mean, some of this is around maintenance as well. You know, residents are not happy with the standard of their estates or the condition of their blocks. And again, if we invest properly as and when things are needed early, then again, we can save ourselves costs later on. So this makes us, I think, more effective, as well as delivering services in a way that residents want. And again, you're right. I think there's been a lot of staff sickness in the past, because it's a very frustrating job at the moment for people to do. If it's frustrating for residents, it's just as frustrating for the people trying to do the job sometimes, who tear their hair out trying to get answers for people when they have to deal with somebody else to do it. So we're trying to support people to make sure they've got, you know, a manageable area to manage, the tools to do that, decent relationships with residents, so that, you know, everyone's happy about the job that's done. And ideally that cuts down on sickness and improves job satisfaction, as well as improving customer satisfaction. I know it does sound a little bit like, yeah, we wanted everything for Christmas, but I think they do go hand in hand. So one if you like, breeds the other. And I don't think we can go down kind of half measures in this particular route. We either do this or we don't. So yeah, that becomes difficult. And just finally, in terms of what you're talking about, digital access, we do know that, you know, 80% of our residents have access to a smartphone. They may not wish to use it, and that's their choice, but we do know that the digital capacity is out there. But like I say, we're not forcing people down any one route, nor do we want to.
Sorry, just to say, I suppose what it is if you manage to pull this off, and this is successful, what worries me is the way how bad we're going to look in the past, because it seems to me a lot of this appears to be common sense, but it seems like it's really hard, because you think, why on earth hasn't it been done before? So I suppose that's probably where I'm coming from. And if, you know, so good luck. And I echo what Carla says, if there's anything we can do to help and support, of course. And I don't want to appear negative. It's just that you're making things, this is making what's around now and what's been around before look really bad. Okay.
If I can follow that up, I think we're getting a general mood here that everybody likes what they're reading. I think the presentation and the clarity of the presentation is extremely good. The graphics and everything else make it easy to understand. I think you have moved into the next stage of saying how this may be achieved, perhaps in better ways than that has been done in the past. But much of what is in this has been in previous documents. The one you've talked about with everybody having access to information, all the officers, that was certainly in the plan that I produced in 2012. Every single member of the housing department was going to have a handheld device which would enable them to record problems across the board, but also to identify people's background and the issues so they could immediately solve that problem. That was 8.5 years ago. It never happened. It never actually got rolled out. And all we're saying is we're great with the words. We think it's on the right lines, but how on earth are we going to make sure this actually happens and does what it's meant to be doing? Because from Scrutiny's point of view, we're not going to scrutinize this document very much because we're saying we like it. What we would be interested in scrutinizing is how it actually delivers.
Yeah, and you know, we would welcome further scrutiny as and when we roll through this, roll it out. I mean, I think one of the things we've been clear about throughout this is not a technology-led exercise. Technology is developing all the time, and we'll take advantage of that. But if we hang it on changes in technology, it won't happen. It's about relationships primarily between ourselves and our residents, and we need to get those right. So the technology will or will not come. Some of it will. That's the direction of travel, and the council's own information technology transformation program will deliver us a lot of the technology we need to do this. Other bespoke technology we will hopefully get in time, but I don't think success is dependent on that. It's dependent on us rebuilding those relationships with people. I think we've got the capacity, hopefully, to do it a bit more now, because we're not in a position that we were sort of 4 or 5 years ago, where we had government imposed rent decreases and we're having to make cutbacks every year. We can't, you know, that's very difficult to have change programs in that situation. We have 5 years worth of rent stability now from the government, which gives us, as in council housing terms, gives us the ability to you know, to plan to invest in the service and make changes. With hopefully the long-term benefit that our services will be more cost efficient and better.
Well, we all hope so, and we all want this to work, and we'll be watching it very closely. Thank you both for your input and or members' questions and all the rest. I think that was a very good session. The very best of luck to you, and please come back to us as soon as you've got something else to tell us.
We'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm now going to move on to the slightly patchier bit of the meeting. The next item on the agenda is the performance report. Now, as we spoke of at the beginning, this is very, very difficult to make sense of in the present context, and we all agreed to stand down the officer. Nevertheless, are there any major points which we can record and take back to the officer and get some responses to that we would like to hear about? I'll kick off by saying that the headline figures were 52% was above target and 47% was better than last year. It doesn't take anybody really to understand that that means that 48% is below target and 53% is worse than last year. These are not good figures, but they are completely skewed by the COVID situation. So it is difficult to pursue that. But do we have anything substantive that we can, or specific that we can ask the officers to come back on? Carla.
Thank you. I've got two specific questions. One is regarding in the management notes section, for several of them, it says that performance is ahead of target for Q1, but I can't see how that is the case unless this is measuring something which is seasonal. So I don't think we have time or I expect the right people are in the room to answer this for me now, but on page 74 of our papers, the measure of BCP B308, which is the number of people access to care through the technology enabled care, and also BCP B307, which is increased number of people able to live independently through home adaptations. The description says the performance is way ahead of schedule for Q1, but the number there is less than a quarter of the annual target. So I can't follow how it's ahead of target for Q1 unless there's some built-in seasonal variations. So that might be something that it would be worth checking at some point.
Absolutely, and we'll get those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. And one other question, which is just a mistake, I think. There are several. So where am I now? I'm now further down. I'm now on page 78. Definitions and reporting timescales for performance indicators. In the method of calculation box, there are several responses here, where I think a formula was meant to be pasted into the box but hasn't been. So there's several bits where it says it is calculated as follows, : and then the next text is, I infer from the text after the colon that there was meant to be a formula in between.
Sure. I'm going to ask officers to take all those back. If any of that is not understood, they'll come back to you, Carla.
Yep, that's fine.
That's grand. Yes, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. And I recognise, these are like very difficult times for anyone like trying to count things and kind of keep track of things. So we appreciate that. What I'm wondering is the process by which previous trends and previous kind of tracking of targets is going to be rebased or provisionally rebased or like temporarily altered and then put back on at some declared and that point for each one in the future. I'm just wondering how it can be managed.
Can I perhaps come in on that? It's something that I've also been concerned about for some time. I'm going to take this to the OSM Leeds meeting because I think this will need to be reset. And that's really why I wanted the performance thing to stand down, because it frankly is meaningless at the moment. It will need to be reset, and I think OSM is the right place to take that on. So,
sure. And I'm just to kind of add that, I'm wondering if like temporary figures, get put in, but at some point they have to be taken out again. And up till mid-March, things were meant to be as kind of normal. Effectively, it was only on the 20th there was a sort of real sort of shutter came down on things. So everything for last year kind of shows where it was going, but we don't know as and when bits will pick up again or be just changed. So I think people need to understand that as well, because targets are set, promises are made, figures are published. How do we deal with it?
I suspect, Martin, that remember that we have 4 quarters of some figures are done on a quarterly basis, and they're in arrears, obviously, but they're done on a quarterly basis. Some are done on an annual basis, and at any one time, about 15% are actually being reset for a number of reasons, because the criteria have set or other things have happened. So it's all a very, very movable feast. It would be possible, I think, to deal with your question in terms of the quarters. We could actually just say from the 4th quarter of 2020, we'll omit that, we'll dismiss it. We'll say that it wasn't valid, so therefore it's taken out of the equation, and then we start again. But the annual ones are going to be more difficult to reset. And I don't know the answer. God knows I'm not a statistician, but there is an answer, I'm quite sure, and we have to find it. So it's a very valid point, and I will certainly raise this at OSM. Any other points on this performance piece? Okay, thank you. The next item is the risk register. Now, this is even more of a problem because there's no pretense, as there is with the performance, that the risk register is anything at all to do with communities. I mean, as you know, communities doesn't have a directorate as such, and the risk register is not split. So all of this is a composite risk register. I saw this as a member of OSM. It came to us there. It comes to OSM, but it is required to come to all of the commissions as to be noted. I honestly don't think I couldn't find a single thing that related to communities. I'm very happy to note it. Does anyone have any other observations?
I'm also happy to note it, Anthony. Thank you.
Bless you for that. I see no other hands, so we will note that report and go forward. The final item is the work programme. Can I just remind you that we mentioned earlier about having a look at the impact fund. I think certainly the criteria and the weightings of the impact fund are something that really ought to be looked at and haven't been. So I would tentatively say that I would like to add that onto the long list. If we can't find room for it, then maybe it'll have to tip over to next year, but I think it ought to be on the long list. Has anybody any observations about what we've got on the list and even when it's on the list? And we'll see if we can deal with it. Carla.
Thank you. I've got a question. So last time I was invited to the agenda meeting, even though I'm not usually a member, to present something, I asked if we could have an item on road verge maintenance. Yep. And I think it was suggested that that was merged with perhaps an update on pesticide use and something about the ecological emergency. And now that the council's strategy on that's come out, I think even more so that that should be the case. I spoke to Martin as my rep on the agenda committee, who said that there was a plan to invite Afzal Shah, the new relevant cabinet member, along. And that some dates have been penciled. However, there isn't any sign of it on the work programme. So I just wondered if someone could update us on
I could do
both the likely dates and also just to check what the remit of that item would be and make sure it covers all of the things that we would want it to cover.
Right, you'll be very pleased to know, Carla, it's in very bold letters on my notes to include this. The problem that we have with your specific item, which was verge cutting, is that it actually doesn't fall within communities, believe it or not. It's a highways issue. But we then talked about in the Leeds meeting the fact that this was probably one of a family of things that probably would sit well with the cabinet member who's now got the overall responsibility for this. Martin and I know felt we both agreed on this. So we did suggest this as a conversation. I mentioned the fact that when I was a cabinet member, I invited conversations in scrutiny meetings. In other words, I just turned up just for people just to have a chat with. And I think that's useful in terms of what is now a new role for Councillor Shah. Whether or not we want to invite, and I think we might invite members from other scrutiny commissions to the broader conversation, I think that's something we could certainly do. Whether or not we have time within our formal agenda to do this, I think is still up for grabs, but I don't see any reason at all why we couldn't have a separate session. Doesn't need to have a tremendous democratic services support. I mean, I'm quite happy to take this on, or maybe with you or Martin or whoever, to take this on and set up a conversation like this. We can do this. So I don't have a date. I don't have anything in the work programme. We've got a Leeds meeting, I've forgotten, next week. Help me out, Bronwyn. Is it next week? Community Leeds meeting?
We have one planned. We haven't settled a date, but
oh, have we not?
Yeah.
Well, look, Carla, it'll be on the agenda for that meeting, I assure you, and we'll try and pin this down. I think there's general support that we'd like to do this. It's just a case of trying to work it into the system.
Great. If I could just put in 2 requests for you to consider then at that agenda meeting. One is, now that the ecological emergency strategy has come out, which it hadn't when I made this request, I would suggest using that as the framework for the discussion.
Yes.
Given that there's actually a relatively small, very manageable number of targets in that strategy, one of which is a change to policy on mowing verges, and another of which is reducing pesticide use, but there's a couple of others as well. So that seems like an obvious way to structure it. And the other is, I know that road verge maintenance is highways' responsibility. However, they delegate that maintenance to parks officers. So
I know
we might have to, we might need reps from both there, because otherwise we might end up with a situation where they say, not my job, Gov, and then we've got the wrong people in the meeting.
I have spoken to John James about this, and he felt that it would be polite to have the highways people within this conversation.
Yeah, I'd rather see both, because I spent several weeks, if not months, making inquiries about this behind the scenes, just as a ward councillor, before bringing it to you here. And part of the problem was highways officers saying, Parks does it, we don't know anything about that, don't ask us, we can't change anything. And Parks saying, well, we do it on behalf of highways, so highways have to tell us what to do. So like, I think we do kind of need both sets of people in the room if we're going to make any progress.
Yeah, okay. I mean, sorry, Martin, I will bring you in. John, when I spoke to John James, my recollection is he'd been in post for 10 days. I'm not even sure if he knew what his job was, in all fairness to him. And so I think he was trying to make sure that he didn't tread on anybody's toes. He acknowledged the fact that they were the operator for this process. But this is the way we actually mow and trim and all around the city is incredibly disparate. It's all, it's lots and lots of different groups of people. So maybe we need to have a bolder, wider strategy here, which is why I think it's very, very important to have the cabinet member responsible in on that conversation. I'll bring you in, Martin. Yeah,
sure, thanks. Just to say, like as Carla said, this goes back sort of months in terms of questions and inquiries, and members of the public, people in meetings are raising these questions. We need the council to show it's willing to just be a bit joined up and say it starts here. The fact it goes off into different bits of different departments and contracts and so on is fine, but someone has to show the lead role and then field the questions and provide some sort of way through with answers. It's just making it sensible for the public. They don't care which bits of the council are dealing with other bits of the council. They just want an answer.
I mean, that person is Councillor Shah. If we were to take this out of a scrutiny meeting, it would not be online and not public, and that's an issue. I think that's got to be taken on board as well. One for the next leads, we will screw this down. I think enough of us are keen to make sure this works, so we'll find a way through this. Any other observations about the work programme? Okay, well, for the first time ever, I think, I'm bang on time at 12:30 for ending the meeting. So thank you all very much. I think this has been a very lively meeting, and John made the point that let's have less presentation and more questions. I feel very strongly about that. I think today has made that very clear that that's a good way of doing things. So thank you all for contributing to that process. I think it's been very valuable. I've enjoyed it immensely. I hope the public have got something out of this as well. Thank you all, and we'll let you know very soon about the Leeds meeting. Goodbye for now.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.